It's never dirty,
do it
always
again. I
clean,
like it. Do it
getting
again.
thrills, never mean. But it's the best I've ever seen. Is Michael's pussy.
America has a very puritanical, strong history of sexual repression.
They had tablecloths on tables because supposedly men could not control themselves whenever they saw legs on chairs because they were starting to see women's ankles.
The culture of going to the film and watching people that can't watch you was so new at the time that a lot of it felt really erotic.
So this is kind of the first things you saw, people who were like showing their legs, people who were kind of showing their shoulders, things that weren't common to see during that time is what you would see in these films. And then progressively, it started getting more and more naked, essentially. They started taking more and more clothes off.
We look at them today and we think they're kind of silly and innocent, but they showed a woman's breasts. Everybody was all tintillated and excited, whereas today, I don't think we have that same notion. In particular, during the Depression, there were a lot of films that had nudity, suggestive themes, things that were a little bit racy or erotic. So they did, after a period of time, start consciously trying to make films that were erotic in nature.
Pre-code era of what you're watching, there was no rules. They could show you anything in film.
Crude is certainly a word you can use to describe most of all of the earliest forms of cinema.
Eventually, that caught up with them in the American public. Some religious organizations and the censors jumped on Hollywood and said, no, you can't be making films like this. They created the Hays Code in the mid-30s. As a result, they flipped all the way back to very family values movies. We went back to a very puritanical, almost Victorian notion about sex all over again. When I think of erotic movies, I think of movies with seduction and kissing and suggestive themes. They're movies that tend to get your imagination working.
I don't think that kissing in Europe was considered erotic. It's not the same. This is an American culture problem.
Well, I think it's all relative to what the culture is about at the time. And coming from the Victorian era, sex was never discussed and people never showed any skin.
The belly dancing thing, I think, is different because that's more of an exoticism problem. That has to do with the way white people and Americans interpret it. When they see this woman belly dancing, they assume this means that she is X, Y, and Z.
In that culture, women showing their belly buttons or dancing seductively or a kiss on the screen, those things were kind of radical because the Victorian culture was disapproving about human sexuality. So in relative terms, those innocent acts were pretty suggestive and much more than people had been used to seeing in the films up until that time.
You're afraid you're going to take me in your arms. You're afraid you're going to kiss me.
Is that so?
Well, why don't you do it?
People that previously were depicted as sexual objects now have sexual agency. Before that, the innuendo and sexual overtones of film were very present, but it was very limiting.
You had the horror films that brought in women who, whenever they had sex on screen, they were almost always killed in the film, essentially giving you the idea that if you had sex, you were doing something wrong.
In the 1950s and the early 60s, America again was in a very prudish, conservative, puritanical mindset. And in the 50s, we saw all of these shows talking about the perfect family, Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best, and all of these TV shows that were very conservative, and they would show the husband and wife sleeping in two separate beds.
But now there's the separation. This is pornographic material, and then you might see somebody who's taken nude photographs and been like, this is nude and erotic, and there's that separation of the two.
I only hope that the whores aren't stealing our lemons. You know, those naughty whores always steal lemons.
We do have a couple lemon whores in this community.
Those damn lemon-stealing whores.
The very beginning of Hollywood and French film, anything that was considered remotely flirtatious was considered erotic.
The sexual movies of the 20s were not that shocking to us today because they weren't pornographic at all. They just maybe had a little nudity or suggested nudity in relative terms again. It was all very subtle and it was all very playful and I would say more erotic than sexual. But back in the day, they did not think so. They thought it was pornography.
No matter what the weather's like, it's always enjoyable. I bring tidbits that is love. We two like to settle down. I take care to remove my gloves when stroking my girl's pussy.